السلام عليكم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونتوب إليه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد, Inshallah ta'ala, one of the things that we always reflect on when we achieve and complete a major requirement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tasked us to do, such as a full commitment of a month, say of fasting for the month of Ramadan, so we can really give our existence as human beings the true fulfillment of the nature and the design that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended with it, and so we can get a chance to that fulfillment to become a reality. And so we strive, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings to bear and the help that He has available to Him to make that mission successful. So He keeps away the shayateen at bay and locks them out, and gives us really a pathway such that our journey through the spiritual path is totally uncluttered and we don't get any distractions in order to arrive to our destination, and hopefully inshallah ta'ala deliver on our commitments to really be aligned with the intent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created this creation that's called the human, in which He has explicitly stated, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Verily, I have not created this nature that's called the human being, except for the purpose that that creation becomes God conscious and comes back to Allah in a state of adoration and worship. And it's indeed a wonderful position to be in, to take that momentum and do work with it. And now that we have been able to fill the tanks for another runway that will last 11 months until we come to the next Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us life and we come back to it again, we have sort of to make some calls, some priorities of what is important to us to put that spiritual capital to work for something that has meaning and has leverage, where we can do something good with it for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and for all of the things that we care about in this life. And that is the shared heritage with other human beings, where we feel that we are together into the same boat or the same journey, trying to go to a place where we try to make life easier as much as we possibly can for all of us, meaningful as much as we possibly can for all of us, and hopefully fulfilling and rewarding as well. And so I thought that one of the things that I wanted to perhaps help us reflect on today for this particular service is this idea of what Muslims generally call the middle way. So there is this complex toolkit that exists within the Muslim portfolio of things that we put into action in order to make the most of our lives. And one of these principles that is extremely important to our success is to understand what this idea is of this nation and our methods being part of a toolkit that's called the middle way. How do we make choices about finding the middle way? So I thought that the verse that I'll choose to reflect on, inshallah ta'ala, is the verse that comes to us from Surah Al-Baqarah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something extraordinarily beautiful and incredibly empowering. He says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we have made you into the nation of the middle way, such that you can take that responsibility to be a witness in the middle way and do something with it that is incredibly important for the success of this endeavor that's called the human spirit and the human journey. So you've been made into the middle nation to do what? لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. Verily, such that you can take the heavy burden of being a witness for all of the condition of mankind. وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا, such that the Prophet ﷺ can be witness over you as well. صدق الله مولانا العظيم for this unbelievable invitation to reflect on this verse today. And I'll tell you, as a person who has spent a considerable amount of my life and time reflecting on this particular verse, it packs a punch. And it hides a lot more than it lets out once you start reflecting about it. You see, one of the things about us human beings that we do extremely well is pattern recognition and averaging. So we have this bias inside us. It's a cognitive and emotional bias, because obviously we have to thread everything through the narrow scope and tunnel of our intelligibility and our ability to make sense of the world. When it gets overwhelming, we automatically fall into a very comfortable position. And that comfortable position is we line up behind the things that we know and recognize, and we start discarding all of the things that are left and right that become a distraction. So we do that with patterns. This is why it's quite surprising that while our senses for touch and smell develop incredibly early after our birth, a baby newborn will recognize their mother's scent almost immediately after the birth, and it will stay with them as the first identifier on how they link to mom. But visual cortex development will take 10 to 12 years. A 10-year-old child to whom you give a partial image, they will have an extremely hard time telling you what that partial image really means. It's hard to do. So we train and we train and we train and we train until we become very good at that skill. And it's the same thing with everything else that we try to understand. Believe it or not, we do that with our spiritual data. So the way we understand what it means to be the middle ground is we take the two bookends of the knowledge of Islam, the sacred knowledge of Islam, and we try to average it, so we come to the middle point and we say, well, that's the right answer is this. Let's take some very practical examples. There is no question that in our community, locally, regionally, nationally, and globally, the spectrum of the positions that Muslims take is gigantic. We have people, there's no question about the fact that the vision that they have of the world is very nihilistic. They are very invested in destroying everything in their path in the name of Islam. And they feel incredibly passionate about this particular project. So to them, the algorithm is very simple. As soon as you need to make a decision about what's right about Islam, you define an enemy, you put yourself as being the only person who's right, and everybody who's wrong is an enemy. And that's a fairly simple model that they use. And God help us, we have seen what those people have taken us and what they have done with the religion and the community and everything that has been invested that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has wanted. And we know what the catastrophes are, from the body count to the terrible violence to all of the things that come from that meaning. We have the other extreme bookend. People who say, you know, this whole stuff about the Quran and the Sunnah and the tradition, that's from the 7th century. I'm way too smart for this kind of thing, so let's leave it where it is. And now they take an open book, and Islam is like an ice cream flavor. Which way would you like it? A lot of like condiments on it, a lot of additives on it. What is it that makes it taste good for you? And then we end up with all kinds of weird stuff because it went the other way. And then we have to exist in this spectrum. We have to find what it is. So typically what we do is we average. Let's not take the craziness of those that have gone essentially ape crazy on violence. Let's not take the extreme, let's call it liberal flavors of where people are going to take us because it divorced us from where we come from. And if we sit somewhere in the middle, that has a chance of being okay. No, it's not. That's my khutbah for the entire day. No, it's not. That's not the right answer to that problem. The right answer of the problem, what wasata here means in the verse, is you anchor back to what is the choice that Allah and the Prophet ﷺ have chosen to be the middle choice. Not yours, not your averaging function. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ has decided is the middle choice. That is a lot harder than you think. And when you go home after this khutbah, inshallah, and start reflecting on it and really invest yourself in what I said, you're going to realize that it's not as trivial as it sounds. It's fairly disarming as a statement, but it's not as trivial as it sounds. But let me tell you, in practice, this approach has created miracles. There is this first scholar in the 4 juristic schools. There are 10 juristic schools. Some scholars say there are many more than them. 10 are known, 4 are famous, and we don't have to get into this today. But in the 4 juristic schools, an Imam Malik came in, one of the very early ones to start his juristic school. And it was very interesting what his personal mission was. And Imam Malik has never, ever, and his biography are very well known, you can verify this piece of information, has never set out to become a founder of a juristic school. Never. That was not the mission. He set out to do one thing and one thing only, is to increase his personal level in the proficiency of the knowledge of the sacred sciences so he can fulfill his obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the best manner possible. That was his mission in life. That's what this man did for his entire life. The forces of nature wanted it, that in Medina, which was full to the brim with jurist scholars who understood the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ at his time, he emerged as being more competent than the majority of them, and he emerged into a unique class where 7 of them dominated juristic opinion rendering because they were experts that were peer recognized by others to have a gift that other people didn't have. And what is that gift? Their competence into the religious sciences. They were just true, enlightened encyclopedias of the entire knowledge of the corpus of the religious sciences. You see, sometimes we have a very amnesic memory in our understanding of our religion. That's the end product. That's where Imam Malik ended. Does anybody remember what it took for him to get there? Let me give you two tidbits that are extremely important to remember historically. One, the corpus of knowledge that Imam Malik left behind us as the combination of the hadiths that he had compiled is called al-Muwatta. That's the Arabic term for it. The English translation of the term Muwatta means simply the path. That's a very simple way to render it into English, in which he categorized and classified the hadiths according to a thematic logic that has to do with the practice of a Muslim in his own life. What is very important about the choices that he made, he implemented exactly this ayah from Surah Ali Imran as a practice in the reality of his life. He had two bookends to choose from. He had the access to the opinions of Ibn Abbas, and he had the access to the opinions of Ibn Umar. Ibn Umar was considered to be a hard, right, conservative into religious sciences. Whenever he had to make a choice, he would err to the side of taking the choice that is more restrictive, more demanding, and harder to commit to. Ibn Abbas, whenever he had a choice to take an opinion, he would go to the side where it is a little bit more lenient, a little bit more accommodating, by the way, both of which within the norms of the Sunnah, within the norms of the Quran, and the accepted norms of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. I'm not talking about comparing here weird stuff with weird stuff, so let's not get confused with that. I'm comparing excellence, but within the excellence you can be amazing versus amazing. That's what I'm trying to compare to. And the work product of Imam Malik, which is amazing, he took the opinion from these two by saying, I'm going to find opinions that go left of Ibn Umar, and I'm going to take opinions that go right of Ibn Abbas. Line them up with the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ and create this book that becomes the guide of life of all of the Muslims and gift it to them. That's called the Muwatta. That is what I'm advocating for. So that's what the purpose of today's khutbah is all about, so we can understand that. And I can tell you that as Muslims, we do this skill extremely poorly. So some community suddenly starts to feel that, we sort of have written the book on how we are become a lot more closer to the Sunnah. So they start to look at everybody else as being too liberal for their taste. They become the norm for the truth, and everybody else is suspicious until proven otherwise. And I think that this is catastrophic. I think it's unfair. I think it's a terrible idea. I think it has a devastating future if it continues to be allowed. And I think it will take us to places that none of us would go to, because it will tip the entire project of Islam upside down. Instead of making the tent of Islam open enough so we can all come under its shade, we're going to end up with that tent closed enough, small enough, that we will all be outside the castle trying to get in. And none of us will feel qualified. And that is why today's khutbah is extremely, extremely important to understand what it means to find our way back to the middle way. That's the theme I'll keep coming back to. So let me give you a practical example of the genius of, I gave Imam Malik because it's basically a gold standard in terms of what this done. Let me give you an example of a Sahabi, and I think that's an equal genius in terms of how this choice, principled choice of doing what is right for Islam, for finding this middle way, has created literally miracles into our tradition. This is the story of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when for the short period of time when he was a Khalifa, appointed a governor over Egypt. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to read for you, this is now, if you want to map this to modern language, this is essentially a diplomatic governance assignment. So somebody comes out from administration school or from diplomatic school, they end up with a mandate and they are now being sent out to an outpost in order for them to represent Islam. So Imam Ali radiallahu ta'ala goes to Malik ibn al-Ashtar and he tells him, I'm going to appoint you to go and govern Masr. So he gives him a wasiyah. So that would be the envelope in diplomatic term, that's what it is, to go and represent us in the best manner possible. First order of business, he reminds him of the anthropology and sociology of Egypt that just about came into Islam. He tells him, إن مصر فيها المسلم وفيها القبطي. Know that the land that you are going to go to is shared between Muslims and Coptic Christians. So, hear me out, he's telling him. Pay attention about who you are dealing with and who you are representing Islam to. إنك تتوجه إلى بلاد قامت فيها دول قبلك بالجور والعدل. You are going to go to a society and a land in which preceding you, that culture had an extremely rich tradition of nation building, where sometimes it went well with justice and sometimes it did not. But what is important about what Sayyidina Ali said here, he did not deny the cultural strands of every group, as we do here today. Because in Islam, we are not trying to achieve communism. We don't want the person from Southeast Asia to become Western. We don't want the white person to become dark skins. We don't want the person who had an ethnic group that came from the Fergana Valley to become conversant into Moroccan slang. That's not what we want. You keep your thread because your thread is the richness of the diversity of Islam. And Sayyidina Ali reminds the appointee that don't you ever violate this particular argument. You look at this stuff happened in the 7th century. We are not talking about somebody that came out from the Kennedy School of Government in 2024. That's 7th century awareness of how the Muslims thought when the Quran informs their decisions and their principled approach. And then he tells him, وَإِنَّ النَّاسَ سَيَنْظُرُونَ فِي أَمْرِكَ. Don't you ever get mistaken that you are going to be taken to task. People will size you and weigh you up. Why? في مثل ما كنت تنظر إليه من قبل. Because you did that before. There were people on the other side, and when you saw them, you had all kinds of opinions. Prejudiced, not prejudiced, about who they might be and what motivates them in doing what they do. Guess what? It's going to be in reverse. You're the comer from outside, and they're going to take you to task and scrutinize you very seriously. Then Sayyidina Ali goes on and says the following thing. And this is absolutely amazing on how he splurted this. Sayyidina Ali didn't have a speechwriter, and he himself was not a product of some sort of diplomatic school. He was the student of the Prophet ﷺ, lived in his household, but his student. And all of this came pouring out of him, irtijalan. Didn't think about it, didn't write it down, didn't make notes. The man is about to go. He's accompanying him, and he just gave him this as it blurted out of him. You see, when there is light in your heart, light will come out of your mouth. That's what this whole thing is about. So he says to him the following thing. فَلْيَكُنْ أَحَبُّ النَّاسِ إِلَيْكَ. Make sure that the best of people that you will draw nearer to you, that become beloved to you, أهل الرحمة, people of mercy, and show to them this mercy to the ra'iyah والمحبة لهم واللطف بهم. So make sure that before you enter into a transaction of governance, you have to give before you take. You need to show mercy, you need to be a caretaker of them, and you need to show compassion towards them. That's what you have to give first before it entitles you then to take something. And then, subhanAllah, which is the method of the Prophet ﷺ in what he used to give as teaching and nasiha, the Prophet ﷺ used to always balance between advising people of things that they should do and warn them against things that they shouldn't do. So Ibn Ali comes in and gives him the strong warning. وَلَا تَكُنْ عَلَيْهِمْ سَبْعٌ نَضَّارٌ إِن تَغْتَنِمُ أَكْلَهُمْ. And don't you ever become a tiger amongst them to go and eat their food. Because that's usually what happens with governance and for people who get appointed to positions of responsibilities. Have you ever noticed that people in the corporate world, when they are at a certain level and they have never been promoted up to a certain level, boy, the first day that they get their promotion and how they feel about themselves. Now I have a baseball stick and can go beat on everybody's head. So that's the first reaction that they get. It's not like, okay, I got promoted, now I have to behave at an upper level of where I used to be so I can earn the respect of my peers and colleagues. That thought never crosses their mind. It's always the other way around. Wait a second, I used to be just one of the guys and now I'm a floor manager. You boys have a problem as of today because I'm going to straighten this place up. So the first thing that Sayyidina Ali says to the man, don't you ever do that, because that's not what it means to be a Muslim. You need to do something different. Then he tells him, فَإِنَّهُمْ صَنْفَانِ. They will break into two types of people. إِمَّا أَقْوَامٌ لَكَ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ. Some will immediately be impressed by who you are and what you are going to do, and they will be supporters of you, either through the affinity of Islam or because they will admire what you have to do. What do you think the second category is if you talk to him about this first category? Because I remember doing the exercise, and I do this all the time. I always try to guess the next words of like an amazing wise person or what the Prophet ﷺ said. And I say, had I put myself in their shoes, what would be the second sentence that I would tell them if I break the community into two things? Obviously, one of the things that we do in the English language is called comparing and contrasting. Comparing is when you show two things that are alike, contrasting when you show two opposites. So clearly he's trying to contrast, he's not trying to compare. He's trying to tell him, you're going to find people who are going to support you, and they might have an inkling towards following the values of Islam. And you are going to find people who are likely to oppose you, and you do something like that. No, he doesn't. He introduces an amazing twist. So here is the second category that he offers him to think about. وَإِمَّا نَظِيرٌ لَكَ فِي الْخَلْقِ. Or you might find other people who will not align with the first point, but they will share with you their humanity. Subhanallah al-Azim. Subhanallah al-Azim, that this religion and this school of Muhammad can produce people like that. You're going to find your supporters, and he didn't say you're going to find your opponents, you're going to find the others who share with you your humanity. You got some work to do. Do you want to make them your supporters? Now you have that option available to you. So you see, that's the point I was talking about. If you start thinking about Islam in the context of nihilism, and everything is mediated through this idea that friends and enemies, we know where this will lead. I mean, we see in the world of it today in all of its flavors. If you want to start thinking that we all have a shared humanity, the first thing that this is going to do to you, it's going to make you a better human being to start with. And then he introduces the compassion of that second group that you're going to encounter with whom you share humanity. يُفَرِّطُ مِنْهُمُ الزَّلَلِ وَتَغْلِبُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْعِلَلِ. These are people that you are going to encounter. Be human with them. They are flawed. They're going to make mistakes, and at that time you need to find it in yourself to be forgiven of them. And they're going to be challenged with things, and you're going to find it within yourself, in your compassion, to understand that you have to help them with their challenges rather than sink them down. And then he says, وَيَأْتِي عَلَىٰ أَيْدِيهِمْ مِنَ الْعَمَدِ وَالْخَطَأِ. And verily, some of their mistakes will be large and sometimes deliberate and not honorable. فأعطهم من عرفك وسفحك. When you encounter such things, that's where you are going to dig very deep, and you are to give them and behave with those people from that which is the best in you, and that is your compassion and your forgiveness. And why should you say this? And that's the conclusion of how he gave him at the short speech. مثل ما تحب أن يعطيك الله. Because that's what you'd expect from your creator, because that's what you'd expect Allah to do for you. Isn't that the case? I mean, how can you claim, how can you argue that you are nothing but the person who's in devotion, in worship, and adoration with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and yet, whenever you want to reflect his attributes, you reflect nothing of his attributes. How can you be that? That is called dissonance. You see, in the language of Islam, there are these two words that are constructed exactly of the three same letters. They all, two of them, use exactly the three same letters. Kha, Lam, wa Qaf. Subhanallah al-Adim. And the diacritical marks and the vowels that get put on them take the two of them into complete opposite directions. Khalq means creation. And what is that? Your outward semblance. I am a creation, khalq. So for you to experience me, you experience me sensorially. You can see me with your eyes, you can hear me with your ears, you can feel my presence. So your sensorial ability has been able to understand and realize and pass through the meaning of my khalq. The exact same three letters become khuluq. Khuluq is your inner being. It's your character. Now that you cannot sense directly. The only way I can let this out is to have resonance between the two of them. You cannot be dissonant between the two of them. If your interior is aligned with your exterior, then you have fulfilled what it means to be a follower of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If these two are dissonant, we end up with all kinds of stuff that we observe in everyday lives. And that is, in short, what Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu did with this man as he prepared him to leave and to go forward and carry on his mission. By the way, in case you are curious about what the history books have said about Malik ibn al-Bashir when he went to Egypt and took that advice to heart, and it became one of the highlights of a governing tenure that has ruled the population for an extended period of time. So this stuff is not theory. This is not about some cerebral stuff that sits out there that we say to kind of make us feel good. It is meant to develop and cultivate in us a spirit of inspiration so we can model our lives according to those that are worth modeling our lives behind them. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فيفوز المستغفرين. الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا دينا إلا قضيته ولا مريضا إلا شفيته ولا مبتلا إلا عافيته ولا ضالا إلا هديته ولا غائبا إلا رددته ولا مظلوما إلا نصرته ولا أسيرا إلا فككته ولا ميتا إلا رحمته. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا منهم. عباد الله، أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة وقد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله لا شريك له. With the brothers who are at the left of the masjid, please keep going to your right. Please keep following all the way to the right. There's plenty of room in the last row. Barakallah fikum, jazakumullah khair. Thank you. Allahu Akbar.